We've got breaking news from the NFL, where the New Orleans Saints are closing in on a deal to make Kellen Moore their new head coach. That's the latest from our NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. Moore spent the past season as the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, picking up a Super Bowl ring. At just 36 years old, he becomes the youngest head coach in the NFL, taking over a Saints team that has missed the playoffs in each of the past 4 seasons. The man himself, Jonathan Jones, joining us now on HQ with this breaking news. It was something that we assumed would happen after the Super Bowl. There was the last domino to fall, and it just fell. Kellen Moore going to be the new head coach of the Saints. JJ, how did this all come about?
Okay, well then let's go back, right? Let's go back to when the Saints had that opening, right? And we know that they fired Dennis Allen. They had Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach. Rizzi was interviewed a couple of times, was certainly a candidate there for the New Orleans Saints, but really more as a backup. The Saints initially had their eyes and hearts set on Aaron Glenn. We know, of course, he went to the New York Jets. Okay, well, how about Joe Brady, the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator? He said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to stick around with Buffalo and the NFL MVP, Josh Allen. I think there was a little, misconstruing of the facts as it related to Mike McCarthy, who quote-unquote pulled himself out of the Saints running. I'm not certain that McCarthy was ever going to get the job, and maybe that's why he ultimately did not interview. But once the dust sort of settled for the Saints, Kellen Moore came into focus. It's impossible to say whether he was truly their top candidate or number 2 or number 3, where he really kind of ranked, maybe after an Aaron Glenn, perhaps ahead of a Joe Brady anyway. We won't know that. But what we do know is that they interviewed him, they liked him, and then the Eagles went to the Super Bowl. And so the Saints could not speak to Kellen Moore the entire week of the Super Bowl, despite the coincidental but interesting fact that the Eagles were in the Saints facility all week in New Orleans. They couldn't have any conversations. But then we knew after the Super Bowl, win or lose, that Kellen Moore and his representation, they would strike back up conversations with New Orleans, with GM Mickey Loomis. That is exactly what happened. And so now we have this deal that has been agreed to on Tuesday. The Eagles have a parade on Friday. Maybe we get an introduction for Kellen Moore before then, a quick flight back to Philly, ride on the float down Broad, and then he gets formally installed as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
What a week. Have yourself a week, Kellen Moore. Get to celebrate a Super Bowl. Not bad at all. All right, so when looking at the Saints, though, you got to ask now, what is next? They have the least amount of cap space. There's so many questions about quarterback. Remember, they signed Derek Carr to that 4-year, $150 million deal. So what needs to happen next, JJ?
Well, for the last 10, 12 years, we've talked about salary cap hell with the New Orleans Saints. So honestly, this is just a way of life for them, right? They're $50 million or so in the hole. That's where they always are in the middle of February, and they'll get under the cap. They'll have some very painful cuts, some painful restructures. Some of the veterans who have been around, you're going to have to wonder and question about their future in New Orleans, whether they're going to want to take a pay cut or not. Cam Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu. We know that they just paid Alvin Kamara. Don't think they're going to be touching that. Ryan Ramczyk heading for a retirement. But you asked about Derek Carr, who, look, the Saints will tell you they got a winning record with Derek Carr as their quarterback. Now, a lot probably goes into that. I don't know that there's any way to get out of his contract. Frankly, he's probably their best option, the New Orleans Saints, with Derek Carr in 2025. Kellen Moore certainly knows that, taking over this job. And so you're going to have, again, a painful next couple of weeks as you prepare for the start of NFL free agency as the league year opens. But Kellen Moore is going to be able to work with what he has there in New Orleans. Some solid pieces, no doubt about it, but they're going to have to start drafting some younger players. And look, what they've been doing, using that pro scouting department to find some bargain finds, if you will, to put it politely. I can also tell you, in terms of his staff, offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier, who has been the quarterback's coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, he is one of the favorites to land the offensive coordinator job in New Orleans. We do know that Kellen Moore is going to be calling the plays there on offense. At defensive coordinator, Brandon Staley is a name to watch. He, of course, was the head coach of the LA Chargers with that defensive background. Another name, perhaps, Christian Parker, a fast-rising defensive coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. Really kind of put Patrick Mahomes in a straitjacket on Sunday night there. He is a name to look for as well. But look, Kellen Moore is going to start filling out that staff rather quickly. But of course, it's not like he's competing with anyone else because the Saints are the last team to make a head coaching hire.
All right, real quick before we let you go. So this now opens up a position as offensive coordinator for now your Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles. Give me a couple names that you could see cycling in there.
Well, the top name is going to be Kevin Patullo, who has already been on that staff. He's been, I believe, the associate head coach, pass game coordinator on offense. He seems to be the heir apparent to that offensive coordinator position. We'll see if he ultimately calls plays, if Nick Sirianni wants to take back the play calling. Obviously, it was much more successful for Philly when he handed that off this year to Kellen Moore. So that would be the top name that I would look at. But again, they're going to have to hire elsewhere on the offensive side because they're probably going to lose their quarterbacks coach. So we'll see who else they bring in for OC interviews who may wind up on the staff in other roles.
Jonathan Jones with the breaking news here in the NFL as the Saints are closing in on a deal to make Kellen Moore their new head coach. JJ, thank you so much. And of course, you can catch all of the breaking news, all the highlights, the scores, and the analysis that you need right here on CBS Sports HQ 24/7. Welcome to CBS Sports HQ. I'm Jenny Dell. That's Jacqueline D'Agostino. We got the JDs here with you today on this Tuesday afternoon. A very busy Tuesday so far. We just start with some breaking news in the NFL.
Of course, because at first when we walked in the door, we were talking about the Eagles having a Super Bowl parade that was scheduled for Friday.
Yep.
Which Kellen Moore is obviously going to be there, but now he has to kind of head on over to New Orleans because that is going to be his new home. How poetic, right? Where he just won a Super Bowl. That breaking news from the NFL where the Saints are closing in on a deal to make Kellen Moore their new head coach. That is the latest from our NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. Moore spent this past season as the OC for the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, as mentioned, picking up that Super Bowl ring. He's just 36 years old. He becomes the youngest head coach in the NFL. And he takes over for a Saints team that has missed the playoffs the last 4 seasons. All right, let's talk more about this breaking news with NFL on CBS's Charles Davis. Charles, I had talked about off the top. It's kind of poetic. You know, Kellen Moore goes there, wins a Super Bowl in New Orleans, and then he's going to be in that facility a lot more to come as he's going to be the new head coach of the Saints. This is something we've been expecting for quite some time. It just felt like we were just waiting for the Super Bowl to pass so this news could be officially official. But now that it is, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, always great to be on with you, Jacqueline. This is always a pleasure. And Kellen Moore, I love the poetic, symphony that's going on there with them being in New Orleans. I think they use their locker room as well in terms of being the home team in the Super Bowl. I'm not sure who had the Saints facility, but I feel like it was them when they practiced there. So it always all comes together. And one other thing I'd say before I dive into this, if I'm Kellen Moore, I skip the parade and I'm right in the New Orleans facility. There is a thing called optics. Let them know that you're enthused about being their head coach. A parade's a parade, but being the head coach of an NFL team and starting right away, get right there and get to work. But I love the pick. New Orleans is a good franchise. Mickey Loomis is the general manager. They have great stability there. They have a defense that you can build off of. Cam Jordan may be getting a little bit older, but if he chooses to come back, he's a great building block for what you're doing with him and Demario Davis, Alontae Taylor in the background, in the secondary. They're always good on defense. Offense, it can use some tweaking, but I think Derek Carr as a quarterback will respond very well to Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator. I think personalities, philosophies, how Kellen Moore goes about coaching. I think Derek Carr can rise up again and fulfill that promise that he always gives us because he is a good quarterback. But Kellen Moore, I think he'll be better. And I think that's where it all begins for them.
Yeah, and to the start of the season, the Saints were looking pretty good. They are 5-5 with Derek Carr, and then 0-7 with the Rattler Jake Haener combination. Just to piggyback off of what you're talking about, I know you mentioned the secondary, that they're pretty solid on defense. Obviously could use some tweaking on offense. What is the ceiling for this team when you think of the pieces that are in play and the cap space issue of it all with Kellen Moore there as the new head coach?
Well, the ceiling, obviously the cap space is an issue, right? So that's something Mickey Loomis is going to have to work on. And he's a good general manager. He's really a lot better than probably his reputation, because Mickey isn't in the news very often, right, Jacqueline? How often do you see Mickey quoted and commented on? How often do you see him on the sidelines at games? He just does the job, and he does it quite well. So we'll have to work on that part. But what division do they play in, Jacqueline? The NFC South, right? That South is competitive, and Tampa Bay's won it the last 3 years. But have they gotten to 10 wins in any of those years to win the division? The division is up for grabs all the time. Whether it's New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, they feel like they can make a move in that division. Tampa's the champions and have been, I think, 3 years in a row. But they don't run away with the division. So if you're asking ceiling, they can take dead aim at their division in year one.
Yeah, I was going to say, it always comes down to the wire, too. The last couple of weeks in that division, it always matters. To your point, it's always very competitive. Charles, we certainly appreciate it. We'll have to see if Kellen Moore goes to that Super Bowl parade or if he just gets on a plane and goes straight to New Orleans. Thanks so much, Charles. And finally, the NFL head coaching carousel for this cycle is complete. Kellen Moore, the last piece of the puzzle there, replacing Dennis Allen as the head coach of the Saints. Of course, Schottenheimer going in for the Cowboys. Liam Cohen coming on over from Tampa Bay over to Jacksonville for the Jags. Pete Carroll, he's going to the Raiders. Aaron Glenn for the Jets. Ben Johnson for the Bears. And Mike Vrabel, that was the first piece to fall, the first domino to fall, I should say, for the Patriots.